Hi, Jose. Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. I just realized that my camera is not active.
Okay. Do you want me to be Jose? I'll be.
I'm gonna
You
rejoin.
are
I'm
very
gonna rejoin
similar.
very quickly.
Okay. So meantime, I will introduce Jose, who is also a professional Scrum trainer by Scrum.org, and we work together to flourish the Scrum trainers community of Scrum.org. He's a business agility consultant and trainer with extensive experience in Agile and as Kanban specialist. Jose is also an international speaker and co-organizer of the in-person Lean Agile London or Global Lean Agile Global, the virtual Lean Agile Global. And you will speak today about story points. Is that correct, Jose?
If it's here. I think he didn't join yet. Okay. So in the meantime.
Now he's here.
Jose. I was starting to ask what Jose? Are story points.
Now with a camera.
There you are, Jose. I was a little bit worried. So I said many things about you, but you probably already know them.
You'll see them in the recording.
Yeah, so Jose is based in the UK, although he is Spanish, and he also speaks a little bit of Hebrew. So
Sababa.
Please go ahead.
Sababa.
This is the little bit.
Yes. Okay, I'm just gonna get my this session. One thing that I'm gonna invite you all to do. Now we're gonna be talking about story points and how we estimate and the process and everything. What I'm gonna use a tool called Mentimeter. So I will invite you to be active participants. There will be a number of questions as we go along. There will be things that I would like you to be participants if you feel like joining. To do that, we're going to be either using your desktops or your mobiles. Usually your mobiles and tablets it works really well. But I invite you to be as engaged as you can. I'm going to be sharing my screen right now. And how do you join the Mentimeter? If you look at the top, it says go to menti.com. And there you've got a number that you can enter and join. So if you can get there, go to menti.com and enter that code 801565. And as you can see, someone has already started. There is a question for you. How well does your current estimation technique work for you? Just to start, not a difficult question. So then I wait for a few little bit, so a few seconds, maybe a minute, for people to join in.
Wait, although we use it in formal meetings.
What do you mean? Sorry.
No, I said that just give them a couple of seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing that for the time being, 20-something people have responded. Half of you kind of works. A number of you, it doesn't really work. And then we got some heroes where it says, awesome, great. So let's see if we can get to something like 40, 45 before I move on. A few more, and then we move on. But you get the trend. We have an open microphone somewhere.
I'm going to mute us all. Now, go ahead, open the mic and...
Okay, so we got a trend here. We got a trend which is saying that the vast majority of us, either it doesn't really work or whatever technique that we use, it works. All right, okay, so that's good. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so it doesn't that doesn't sound great. Okay, let's ask then, what kind of estimation techniques do you use if it doesn't work? So you have few options there. You have story points, t-shirt sizes, flow metrics, function points, no estimates, person days. So let's see what sort of like techniques are useful and more used. And saying that person days are very, very popular.
Mainly in Israel.
Cool. But yeah, okay. So person days are very popular. Story points are used quite a bit. And t-shirt sizes. Okay. Normally, I will usually see the story points and t-shirt sizes in person days is also common and popular, but not typically I don't say it as popular as this. But that's great. Okay. So maybe there is something about these approaches that could be, I don't know, maybe it's problematic, maybe we're not using them, maybe there is something missing. But what we said is like these estimation techniques are either kind of working or not really working. Okay. So my talk is called All Your Story Points Are Belong to Us. And if you get the meme or you get the source of it, then you get geeky points. It comes from this image. Anybody recognize that? Where is inspired? If not, this is a game. This is an image from a game that was originally in arcades in the late, I think it was in 1989, and in the early 90s, 91, 92, it got ported to. I think it was the Sega. I don't remember which one. And one of the things that it became super popular as a meme was that this boss was basically saying, we have conquered all your bases. You've been defeated, you lost. But in executing this game, in bringing it, in translated to English and making it available on the console, it got lost in translation. Yeah, and the English that they were using was, well, terrible in some way. Yeah, so why am I using this? Why I'm using this title? I think that many times what happens in a lot of how we do estimation is that it's possible to see that we have lost an understanding of the purpose of estimation. Estimating work, it's important. Why it's important, we may have forgotten about it, and we may have fallen into some practices and some ways of doing it which are not helping us. Okay, so before we talk about any estimation, what I would like you to ask you is, what's the purpose of estimation work in your own words? So if you can type there, I'm going to give you again a minute or so. What's the purpose of estimating work? Why do we do this? I love to see what words you use. Bit of typing. Okay, better planning. Estimate when we can deliver. Right, those two. Assess how much work we can do in a sprint. Enable quick planning, prediction, right? There is this big one, planning, ETAs, quality, quantify effort, better predictions. Okay, so achieve a sprint goal, some element of delivery assurance, some planning. Okay, lots of these kind of things. All right, good. Okay, that's good for me. Now, when we're doing estimation, I think there are, like, it's important to make a distinction that there are two kinds of estimation. Yeah, one of the estimations is for what we call single item estimation, when someone shows us a card and they say, hey, or a piece of work, a single piece of work, and say, hey, how long will it take to do this? And the other one is when we are trying to do multiple item estimation. So someone says like, hey, we got a deadline, how much work can you do it? Can you do in this period? Or we have an amount of work, and how long will it take us to do it? Why is this important to make this distinction? Is because how do we estimate this is very different, should be very different. Okay, I'm gonna focus first on single item estimation, and then I'm gonna go into multiple item estimation. When we do single item estimation, the sole purpose of estimating work is to be able to answer two questions, just two questions. The first question is, can we do this work in the time allocated to it? Or the time available to us. And the second one is, do we understand it well enough to start working on it? That's really basically what we like, the two questions that we need to do. One is about time. Can we do it in the time available? And the other one is about understanding, knowledge. Yeah, do we understand enough to get going? So if you think about this, there are going to be only three possible answers. First one is when we basically we can answer yes to those questions. Yes, it's small enough so that it fits in the time that we have available. And yes, we understand it well enough to get going, to start working on it. We might not understand it perfectly, but we understand it well enough to get going. All right? So if you can answer yes, or if any team can answer yes to those two, go for it. We can work on it. But what happens when we cannot answer yes to both? If we can only answer no to one of them. So when the item, the story, whatever it is, if it's too large, then basically we say no, it's too large. We cannot do it in the time where it's available to us. Then typically what we try to say is like, can you try to break it down? It's too big. Yeah. In that card, you can imagine what DF means, fishing, but it's just too big. Okay. The other option, the final option, is when we don't understand it well enough. And if we don't understand it well enough, we need to refine it further. We need to get more knowledge. So there are just three options. Yes, it's small enough and we understand it well enough. No, it's too big. No, NC means no clue. Yeah, no, we don't understand it well enough. So having more than these three options, it's really unnecessary. It gives us, it might give us a sense that we, using things like Fibonacci sequence and stuff like that might help us with some element of like estimation, but many, many, many times it's giving us a sense of additional knowledge or precision that may not help us enough. And if it helps you, that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm perfect in this, but many times the way we say it is that we put a lot of effort in doing all this story pointing and doing all these Fibonacci sequences, when the question that we needed to answer was, is it small enough? Yeah, a much simpler question. And unfortunately, when we do all these things, what we end up doing, and I think something that links to some stuff that Voas was talking when we were talking about ceremonies and things like that. We end up with all the good intentions and the good purpose of the techniques that we use many times. Many times, story points, for example, often become what I will call a story, an act of business theater. Yeah, that pretends to give more knowledge that actually we have, pretends to answer these questions, but we end up doing like a little bit of like, theater on the stage. So good stories and good ideas can many times go into like what we call like can be either used or unfortunately over time they can end up being abused. And many times they're abused because we forget the purpose of them. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few examples. It's time for you to do something. Next exercise. There are 6 examples on this screen, and I would like you to give like your thoughts about whether these 6 examples are good use of a story points or abuse of a story points concept. I'm gonna give you a few seconds, a minute or so. See what you think. Back to your phones. Choose for each one of them. You can choose whether they are good use or have use. Getting some first of them. Okay. Okay, so 50, yeah, some of them are about 50-50, but towards leading towards abuse. All right, okay. So I will say that many of these are potentially abuse of story points. And very briefly, may go through some of them. Like Jira introduced recently like decimal numbers with the story points. I don't know what you feel about that, but that's crazy in many ways. Yeah, it's just what I was saying. It's just trying to, the fact that a story point would be 3.7. It's just a false sense of precision, a false sense of, oh, because you have decimal numbers, we must be better at this. It's just deluding ourselves. When we use normalized story points across multiple teams, I think the problem with those is that the concept of story points makes sense within the walls of a team, within the context of a team. So trying to normalize and compare story points across multiple teams, it's just breaking the whole purpose of a story points. The story points are meant to work within the constraints of one team and only one team, not beyond teams. Yeah. Ever increasing velocity, it's a sure way of getting people not achieve, or teams not achieve sustainable pace. It's a sure way of getting things gained. So it's the give me more, give me more, give me more. We have, as human beings, we have limits. Yeah. And to be honest, when I've seen this thing, like someone said, oh, we want to have more increase in velocity. Fine. I just double up every story point that we have used, and that's it. I just double up my velocity. What's the point? Didn't achieve anything. Building on the story points, the same thing. I mean, it just leads to all sort of very, very messy situations. Using story points to assess a team performance is all the same thing. Yeah, all these things just keep going and going and going. All right, so I'm going to make a statement here, and I would like to know whether your thoughts about whether it is true or false, this statement. I'm gonna suggest here a statement. Well, the statement suggests that the story points must correlate to time. Is that true or false? Okay. So the moment is 2/3 towards false, 1/3 towards true. All right. Okay. So that's about 35. Yeah, that's great. So okay, I'm gonna give you what I think. I think that the answer should be hopefully true. There must be some correlation for a story point with time. Remember the first question, when we're doing estimation, the first question was, can we do this story in the time that we have available? In some ways, for a story points to be able to be useful, relevant, useful technique, it's got to translate to something in our physical domain. And in this case, it's about time. Yeah, the question about when will it be done, when will it be done, how long will it take, all those questions which are never going to go are about time. Yeah, so it has to show, I think, some sort of correlation towards time. Otherwise, how is it working? Yeah, are these techniques using? If you can show correlation, then your use of story points is great. I'm going to explain why. So I'm going to start with, like, in the vertical axis, I'm putting story points. I'm going to use the typical sort of like pseudo Fibonacci. Should be 21 if it was full Fibonacci. So you've got 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. So, and on the horizontal axis, I'm going to put elapsed time. Yeah. So the passage of time. real days in this case. Yeah, I go from 1 to about 36 days. So I use the word elapsed time. If you are in the world of Kanban, you may hear things like cycle time. You may have heard things like lead time, stuff like something about time. Okay. Now, if you had perfect correlation, if a story points had a perfect correlation between story points and how long it takes to eventually do work, you will have a situation where probably you will have like these kind of like dots, very, very simple, not straight line, yeah, but something like this. And the way I've done this is like I am assuming that in this case, every story point, every increase in story points doubles up in time. Okay, that doesn't have to be what happens in the real world for you. I'm just making an assumption for the graphic, yeah. But if there is a perfect correlation, all the stories that were given an 8 story point, given 8 story points, will end up will it take us 16 days to do the work. We know that that's not going to happen. It's not going to be this kind of perfect, yeah. So perhaps there is a margin of error. There is some sort of like, you know, the distribution, and some of those will take a little bit shorter, or maybe a little bit longer, yeah. And with our kind of work and environments that we have, usually if we're going to get it wrong, usually we get it wrong to us more time, taking more time, yeah. So, but as long as you can see a pattern like this, a pattern where the story points more or less correlate to a elapsed time, a range of elapsed time, that will be story points working for you as a technique. Yeah, you can translate them to time. If you're using Scrum, for example, and you chose your sprint length to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, yeah, you have this amount of time, and you're trying to do the work in that time. Yeah, so if you can make that kind of correlation to time, story points are helping you.
Jose,
When we've measured this,
and questions in the chat, do you want to answer them now, or relate to them now, or later?
I'm going to talk about velocity later, so I'll come back to this. Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, whenever you want.
So when we measure this, what happens many times is that it looks like this. So the spread of each story points is so large that all this is almost no distinction. You can have stories which were given 1 story point and taken lots of time, and stories that were 8 and have taken very little time. So it almost looks like, as it translates to time, they become really, really like random. Yeah. And if that's the case, then I will argue that use of story points are not helping. And it's not going to help at all when we use, or maybe not at all, it's not going to help much when we're trying to do velocity calculations, because it doesn't, if it's not showing some sort of correlation to time. So I'm going to ask you a question quickly, is do you check that your estimates have some correlation to elapsed time? And the answers are the options are yes, they more or less correlate, yes, and they show no correlation, and no, we don't check.
That's assuming we are using story points, right?
Assuming they're using story point, or or any estimate, actually. Any estimation that you use, does it correlate well to elapsed time? If you're using person days and you thought that you were going to be 20 person days, but actually takes you 50, and you have the same sort of like huge spread, that's not working, yeah, either. So whether your estimation correlates to the actual elapsed time. All right. If your data, if you're telling me that that's the case, then that's good. Keep going. It's working for you. It kind of like doesn't feel entirely congruent with the beginning when you told me the estimation wasn't working mostly. So there is a bit of a disparity, yeah. But if it's working, it's great, yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
When I said it's not working very well, it
Hmm.
was mostly because it takes a lot of time to estimate.
Okay.
And it's sometimes we feel we waste a lot of time during the planning and estimations, and
Good.
that's why we're not very happy with this approach.
Cool. And that might be another one, is like, how much time do we put into doing the estimation? Sometimes we put so much time, and we know like the whole Agile is about empiricism, it's about doing it. Sometimes we spend so much time doing planning and estimation and all those things rather than doing, when we really don't know. You know, and many times we just don't know entirely well what we need to do. There is a whole process of discovery, even when we've done, you know, all the refinement and we think that we know, there is always a discovery process. Complex environments require discovery. So thank you for that point. That's a very, very good point. All right. Okay. So if you think that is working, it's great. Yeah. What I will suggest is like another one is like, if you are curious or you don't think it's working for you, what I would suggest is that you explore the possibility of like how might be doing something different, which might also take a lot less time, which is using things like cycle time. When we use flow metrics, what they often provide, it's a more reliable approach to do this kind of estimation, okay? And it's much faster one. Why is this? Is because what we many times saying is like actively estimating new work that we haven't done yet. It's in complex environments. It's a exercise in guessing things that we don't know yet. However, when we use things like cycle time calculations, what we are saying is like we know how work has been, what kind of work we do before, and by using the data that we have, we can forecast ahead. It's much faster than trying to decipher how this specific piece of work will do. And I have to move into this because otherwise it takes too long and we don't have enough time. Before I go to multiple item estimation, is there a question that we need to ask? Any question? Michal?
Yes, so there was, I will start from the beginning. Joit asked us, Jeff Sutherland prides himself that the teams that he coaches grow sprint on sprint in velocity. Personally, I disagree, and I don't know his thinking. Do you have any ideas?
How polite do you want me to be?
Not at all.
I think statements like that are bollocks, to use British language. This myth of ever-growing velocity, it kills teams. It absolutely can destroy people. Yeah, or we end up gaming the story points. Sorry?
Oh, sorry. I thought it was a mute. I'm sorry.
I'm being probably too categorical in these things. Look, if you're in, it depends where you are as a team, yeah. And if it's a team that not to be more contextual, if it's a team that perhaps is new or is setting up, or they just come together and they're starting to do work, it is possible that you will see an increase on their velocity and so on. It is possible that might happen, yeah. But the mindset of ever-growing velocity can absolutely destroy people. Yeah, give me more, give me more, give me more. It creates things like a lot of pressure, cognitive load. You've done all these things, now do more and do more. This is just, we know in the world that we cannot do this. There is a breaking point. There is a reasonable amount of work that each person can do. Yeah. If you keep asking for more velocity, what I'm gonna do is game the process. Yeah. And what before used to be 3, I'm gonna make it a 5. That's how I get more velocity. Yeah. And when we talk about velocity, which is next, I'll give you an alternative where I think it's probably more reliable. Yeah. Is that okay? Have I answered the question? By just saying bollocks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
So another comment maybe from your own. If you have story points and velocity, you can find time. You can find times, but story points themselves are nothing to do with time. Like time doubles the velocity equal distance, but distance doesn't have to do with time.
So it's an interesting thing. Story points in particular. Yeah, it's I'm not going to use velocity comes in a minute. Okay, when we do story points, even someone like Mike Cohen have written about the fact that time, like story points, were always about time. Yeah, we use the story points as a mechanism to get people, to get all of us to be able to do all these comparisons between what we've done, you know, all these affinity and relative comparisons and so on. In the end of the day, the story points are not actionable unless you can translate it to the real world, to the physical domain. Yeah, and their connection to the physical domain, it's about time. Yeah, think about what the sprint is. The sprint is not a 20 story point sprint. It's a 2-week sprint. It's time. Time does not disappear. Yeah, so there is a connection to time. And if the story points, we use story points to calculate velocity. If the story points don't show a correlation to time, then your velocity will not show a correlation to time either. That's what I'm going about. Like, it's, in the end of the day, it has to have a correlation to time. Is that okay?
Okay, so there are a few more, but maybe
Yeah.
you want to continue for now, and if you have more time, then we'll
Okay.
answer the questions here or in the breakout room after your talk.
Cool. Let's talk about velocity then. Let's talk about velocity because velocity is about multiple item estimation. Yeah, it's a number of how many PBIs can we do on a sprint, for example. So I'm going to say that the purpose of multiple item estimation is to be able to predictably answer one of these two questions. One is how much work can we do by a certain date? For example, by the end of a sprint or in the next quarter or in the next year, however long you think is appropriate. And the other question is, how long will it take to complete a batch of work? Someone might say, hey, you know, we got 20 initiatives to do. How long will it take us to do these 20 initiatives? So the two questions are kind of like the reverse. Once you start with the date and is how much can we do in that period. The other one is we start with a number and then is how long will it take you? What will be the time it will take? So I'm going to ask you for what kind of estimation techniques do you use for this? Velocity, as with the story points, velocity with the number of stories done, whether you use things like Bernard charts, whether you do things like CFDs, Monte Carlo simulation of throughput, or Gantt charts. How many of these you use, or which ones? All right, so you're using story points a lot, most of you. Well, actually, stop. Let's get more numbers. There's a bit of spread. Okay. So most of you are using velocity of one or two types, maybe Bernard chart to also, like, I guess, project ahead. Good. Thank you for that. So I'm gonna then say that when we do a story multiple item estimation, multiple estimation uses some sort of like what we call a count over a period of time calculation. And this might be expressed in a number of ways. One example is when we use story points per sprint, what we typically will call velocity, that uses that format. Yeah, a count, in this case of a story points, over a period of time, in this case, whatever the sprint length. You might do the number of PBIs, product backlog items per sprint. So instead of doing story points, you might be counting PBIs per sprint. That's the same thing. You have a count over a period of time. Another example, and this again popular in Scrum, one that we use a lot more in the world of Kanban will be the number of work items or number of PBIs per day. Same thing, it's a count over a period of time. Yeah. So all these different ways of doing multiple item estimation follow the same kind of patterns, the same structure. Yeah. Some sort of count over a period of time. Now, the one thing that it's very, when we're using knowledge work, yeah, there is something that is dangerous about this velocity. Can someone, can you put in chat, how would you define what velocity is? Story points per sprint. Is that enough? How do you calculate the velocity? Put in chat for me. How would you do that? Is it just the story points of the previous sprint, or do you go several sprints back? What do you do? Okay, so here someone there, Simpson, you say like a Gaussian distribution, okay, and then what do we do with that distribution? Let me ask you different, because I don't know whether people are typing or not in chat. How many of you use like things like the average of several sprints in order to calculate velocity? Give me a hands up if you are. Yeah, a few hands up, a few thumbs up. Okay. Now, there is a problem with that. And it's typically the average is about, well, about halfway. So when we use averages, we are saying that we only really have 50% confidence in the results. Half of the time is going to take more, and half of the time is going to take less. The use of averages really only creates 50% average. Basically, it's a coin toss to use averages. So when we are in what we call VUCA environments, complex environments, yeah, using averages, it's a very, very risky approach to business predictability, to forecasting, to planning, because we are using half a chance, 50% confidence levels. And that's typically not enough. Okay, so if something, you need to be able to increase your confidence, and usually that's done by going a little bit lower than that. Yeah, in the world of like flow metrics and so on, we tend to use throughput, like throughput being the number of items that we deliver per given time, like days. Yeah, and we use a statistical forecasting using something called Monte Carlo simulations. Yeah, but the key use of when we use Monte Carlo, the key thing that makes it more reliable is that we are not using averages. We are going for what we call the 85th percentile, 85th confidence level, or the 85th, 95% confidence level. Yeah, we are playing a much more realistic, safe game, less risky game in creating expectations. Yeah.
But for how long of periods you take an input data to the Monte Carlo model? 1 year, 1 quarter?
You actually only you're not gonna. It might be difficult. Believe me when I say that you only need to have. If you're using, for example, days to calculate to do your Monte Carlo, you only need whatever unit of time you're using. Actually, you only need about 12 data points to have enough data and use it statistically valid. So you don't need to go back 1 year. If you were calculating a story, if you were doing throughput on a number per day, yeah, you only need about 12 days. Typically, we will go about 20 days to have a little bit more data. But to be able to use this kind of simulations in a statistically viable way, you only need 12 data points. I can share a link of formulas about it. People like Troy McGinnis have done a lot of work on this to share this. Just 12. So basically, within one sprint, for example, you will have enough statistical data to use Monte Carlo and throughput. Cool. There is a question by is hands up or is it a question by Civica? I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correct.
Ika, you pronounced very well.
Good. I think it was just hands up. Okay. All right. Okay. So velocity in itself and throughput and all stuff, they are very, very similar. They are not different. What I think is the big difference in how we do this and how predictable and useful it becomes is that we don't use the 50th percentile. We don't go to the average. Yeah. Averages typically are about halfway, and halfway means that you only have 50% chance of getting it right. Okay. So that's something to consider in if you want. And just to do a bit of like a Steve Jobs kind of like thing, one more thing. There is something else. There is another metric which is awesome. And it is one that allows us to start doing, to really change the way we run our daily scrums, our agile, whatever. You don't have to, if you're not doing a scrum, and it's what we call the aging work in progress, right? So aging is what I call like the most awesome chart most people have never heard of. What is looking at is the amount, is the work that is already, is what we are working on, what has started but not finished yet. And it's allowing us to see how well it's moving through our work. Yeah, if any of those, you can see there in the image on the left, you have the little blue dots in the graph in the middle. Yeah, if the dots are this represents your work, your PBIs. If they land on the areas which are green, it means that they are moving well, they are progressing fast enough, and if it continues this way, you shouldn't worry. It's going to be okay. They will be finished by the end of a sprint, let's say. But if they are landing in the areas which will be, for example, the orange or the red ones, they are not moving well enough. They are moving slowly. And if it continues that way, they will not be finished on time. Right? So when you think about this stuff, yeah, this kind of graph can totally transform your daily scrum. When I've seen this used in daily scrums, it's an awesome change because it's starting to allow teams to talk about and anticipate problems with their delivery. And that may be on day 2 of a sprint, on day 3 of a sprint. Yeah. When you start looking at this thing and say, like, are we, how things are going, start anticipating, remove some of the guesswork. Yeah. And allow us to actually self-organize. This kind of alternative to estimation and metrics and so on makes the concept of self-organization even more tangible for teams. It can be very, very powerful thing. And I will say that this is, using things like this is like what we call the best kept secret in Agile on Scrum, because it can totally change how teams work. We'll say, like, potentially by looking at these kind of things, we can probably, hopefully, allow us to level up. It's something that I will suggest, like, I'm not saying like stop doing what you're doing, because you're saying that generally what you're doing is working well, but I will suggest, like, what about experimenting with it and seeing how well things work, and maybe do some sort of parallel check and say, like, is this going to work maybe better? Is it going to help us? But whichever way you do, I mean, we're in the world of continuously improve, so an empirical improvement. So hopefully we can level up and defeat that estimation boss, which is always a challenge. So I just want to say thank you. I think I am just about with time, and I will take some questions.
Excellent. PSK. That's cool.
Yes.
But,
so
I mean, Scrum.org has even has worked on how we can bring things like Kanban and the metrics and so on into professional Scrum. So
if you want to hear more about Monte Carlo and other measurements, so Jose and myself are planning to run PSK together very soon.
Yes, hopefully.
So we will schedule that, and you are welcome to join us. And thank you very much, Jose. Do we have time for questions here, or should we go to the breakout room, Danko?
If there is a Monte Carlo, is there a Las Vegas? Because I'm more like Las Vegas than Monte Carlo. Okay.
Good.
No,
It's another type of
Carlo.
casino. No,
Yeah, Monte Carlo is great.
yeah.
Las Vegas has its own advantages. You know,
Mhm.
what happens in Vegas stays Vegas.
Yeah, in Monte
Okay.
Carlo, when what happens in Monte Carlo, we want to talk about it.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Shoot.
Hi, Dana.
Actually, I have two. Maybe I'll reserve the
We'll
second.
start with the second one.
Always. Okay, so my question is, would you recommend the team to update the story points to the actual ones or to keep the original?
I would. That's a great question. Thank you. I would keep the original one. Sorry. Actually, when you talk about update, do you mean update after the fact, or after the work is done, or updating
Before you close,
as?
just before you close the story, would you recommend them to update it or not, or keep it as the original?
I would keep what I would. My gut feel on this, and I'll explain why, is that I will keep whatever was the story points that, if they're using story points, whatever is the story point they use at the time of selecting that the story for work.
Why?
What I will then do is calculate the actual elapsed time. Yeah. If we change the story point afterwards, yeah, what we might have is we might lose that error, that potential, which is normal. Yeah, we're working with uncertain, complex work. Yeah, so we will almost like, it's almost like deleting that knowledge, and it will reduce our ability to inspect and adapt. Yeah, so I would say this is the story points, and we thought it was an 8, or we thought it was a 3. Yeah, but in this case, these 3 translated to 20 days worth of work, or these 3 was done in 1 day. That's the really valuable thing. That's the way it's like, if you can show good correlation, because if your 3s kind of like have a narrow band of time, yeah, then it's telling you that your use of story points is working well. If you can see that kind of correlation, your use of story points is working, keep going. Yeah. If not, if it has all these really wide overlapping bands, what it's telling you is that your use of story points is not really translating well. Yeah. If you change it at the end, it's kind of like you will forget that valuable feedback loop. It will be missed.
But then it
Does
won't
that-
show the real velocity.
It will not. It will. Yeah, exactly. It will not show you the real velocity. It will not show you your normal error in how we estimate, because we use the original estimation to plan. Yeah. If we then correct it, we forgot. We are kind of like ignoring the error. Yeah. And the error is valuable. The error is there. The error is us working in human teams. Yeah. We don't know all the information. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Go.
One more question.
Yeah.
One last question.
Yeah. My
I have a question.
Yeah, you can go.
Hi, Hila.
We always have an issue when encountering a feature that requires additional design. So we always have the kind of conflict, whether we should do it within the sprint, and then it's hard to calculate the story points, or do it beforehand, and then it will, take a lot of time.
This was my second question.
And it's a great question, both of you. Then so the interesting thing for me is that even when we do the best, what we miss many times, we talk about is like with this kind of like when we do story planning poker and things like that. Yeah, the really valuable aspect of those sessions for me is the conversations. Yet we spend more time with probably the mechanics of planning poker and getting to the number. Yeah, the number for me, as I say, with just saying 1, too big, no clue, that's enough. Yeah, the conversation is important, but even the best conversations, as I say, it's only the teams believe that they know enough to get started. Once we get started, we are going to discover things. Tell me if I'm not answering the question specifically. We're going to discover things, and it might be things that we need to do more design of, things that we need clarity on. We thought that it was going to be easy to integrate it with some sort of like API, or suddenly we need a marketing team to help us. So even with the best intention, the best conversation, our work is VUCA, is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and there will be some discovery. The challenge that we have in our businesses and in our society many times is that we are seeking certainty. We rather create a pretension or a feeling of certainty. Instead, what we should do is like embrace the uncertainty. Yeah, there is an element of discovery. Let's just discover it. So I don't know if I'm addressing the question. Is like when we start doing the work. Yeah, we've done enough work to have confidence that we are more or less understanding, that we have refined it enough and we understand enough. If you get started and that discovery process has happened, that's normal, that's good, that's part of it. Yeah, just keep going, I will say. Unless that discovery process says like, look, this has just blown up into a huge piece of work which doesn't make sense right now. And you might have to go and say, okay, let's throw it back to the drawing board. Yeah, but unless it's a huge kind of like things that invalidates the whole story, yeah, I would say keep going.
Okay.
And of course, the answer is going to be it depends on the context, but you know that will be my instinctive answers to that.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. As interesting as it sounds, we are just need to go to the next one, although I would invest at least 2 more hours or 2 story points on this interesting lecture. I will open the room.
The breakout, yeah.
So those of you that wants to investigate more about it will be able to join. And those of you that are not be able to join, try to reconnect to this session, okay? Because maybe this is the problem, okay? So I'm opening the room right now, and we're going to another one. And thank you very much, Jose.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
and
you
I will
very
go.
much. I'll meet you in the after party breakout room.
Yeah, and I just say Sababa, which is my
Sababa.
the best room. Hey.
Sababa, thank you so much for joining us.
I'll be in the breakout room.
Save a beer for me. As you know, the beauty is in the eyes of the beer holder.
Good.
Good. So we're moving into the next session.
Is the breakout room open?
Yeah, open the room.
I don't see it, by the way.
Because you don't have enough story points to start with.
Exactly.
No, I'll help you.